The smell of turkey and cranberry sauce filled my parents' dining room as I walked through the front door, still wearing my work clothes from another 14-hour day at the marketing firm. My cousin Madison was already holding court, describing her recent promotion to regional manager while my aunts and uncles nodded approvingly. When I quietly took my seat, my mother looked at me with that familiar expression of disappointment and announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Jaclyn has always been the most useless child we have. Never accomplished anything meaningful like Madison." The entire room fell silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. I slowly stood up, looked directly at my mother, and said, "Then stop calling me every month begging for money to pay your mortgage." My mother's face turned the color of vanilla pudding as those words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. The silence stretched so long I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice cracking slightly. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, my hands surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Should I start with March when you needed $800 for the electric bill? Or maybe February when Dad's medical tests cost $1,200 that your insurance wouldn't cover? Uncle Robert, my father's older brother, leaned forward in his chair. "Wait a minute. Carol told us you two were doing fine financially." My mother shot him a warning look, but I wasn't finished. "Actually, Uncle Robert, let me show you something interesting." I scrolled through my bank transfers, each one a painful memory of late-night phone calls and guilt trips. January 15th, $1,200 for their mortgage payment. December 23rd, $900 for Christmas gifts because they couldn't afford presents for the grandkids. November 8th, $1,500 for Dad's dental work. My father, who had been quiet until now, cleared his throat. "Jaclyn, this isn't appropriate dinner conversation." "Oh, but calling me useless in front of our entire family is appropriate," I asked, my voice getting stronger with each word. "Would you like me to continue? Because I have 3 years' worth of transfers here. The total comes to just over $43,000. Cousin Madison's mouth fell open. She had been smugly sipping her wine just moments before, basking in the praise for her supposed achievements. Now she looked like someone had just told her Santa Claus wasn't real. Aunt Patricia set down her fork with a sharp clink against her plate. "Carol, is this true? You've been borrowing money from Jaclyn." My mother tried to regain her composure, smoothing her hair and straightening her shoulders. "It's not borrowing when it's family. Jaclyn has a good job, and we raised her. We sacrificed for her education." "Sacrificed?" I laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. "You mean like when you made me pay my own way through college because you said character-building loans would make me appreciate my education more? Or when you told everyone I was too selfish to help family while I was literally keeping you from losing your house?" Uncle Robert's expression had shifted from confusion to something approaching anger. "Carol, I asked you directly last Christmas if you needed help with anything. You told me everything was under control." "Because it was under control," my mother snapped. "Jaclyn was helping us." Helping. I scrolled to another screen on my phone. "This shows automatic monthly transfers of $600 that have been coming out of my account for the past 18 months. You set up a direct withdrawal so you wouldn't have to ask anymore." The room erupted in whispers and shocked murmurs. My grandmother, my mother's own mother, shook her head slowly. "Carol Marie Henderson, how could you do this to your own daughter?" Madison finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "But Mom always said you were irresponsible with money. She said you couldn't even keep a steady job." Irresponsible? I turned to look at my cousin, this person who had been held up as the golden standard my entire life. "Madison, what do you do for work again?" "Remind everyone." She shifted uncomfortably. "I'm in sales management at Morrison Financial." "Right. And what do I do, Madison?" Her eyes darted toward my mother, seeking rescue that wasn't coming. "I thought you worked at some marketing place." "I'm the marketing director at Sterling Communications. We handle campaigns for Fortune 500 companies. My starting salary 3 years ago was more than what your entire management team makes combined." I turned back to address the room. "But somehow I'm the useless one who can't manage money." Uncle Robert stood up from his chair, his face flushed with anger. "Carol, I specifically asked if you were having financial troubles. You looked me straight in the eye and lied." My mother's careful facade was crumbling like wet paper. We were embarrassed. We didn't want the family to think we couldn't take care of ourselves. So instead, you let them think your daughter was a failure while she was secretly supporting you. Grandmother's voice carried decades of disappointment. What kind of mother does that to her child? The turkey was getting cold on everyone's plates, but nobody seemed to notice. My cousin Madison looked like she was about to be sick. I don't understand. If Jaclyn has been helping you financially, why did you always tell us she was struggling? My father finally spoke up, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. We thought it was better for family harmony if people didn't know about the money situations. Family harmony. I laughed again, this time with genuine disbelief. You've spent years convincing everyone I was a disappointment while I kept you from losing everything. How exactly does that create harmony? Aunt Patricia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Honey, we had no idea. Your mother always made it sound like you were barely getting by. Oh, I've been barely getting by, just not for the reasons you thought. I looked around the table at faces that were seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Try paying your own bills plus someone else's mortgage and see how much money you have left for the kind of lifestyle that impresses people at family dinners. The weight of 3 years' worth of financial stress and emotional manipulation was finally lifting off my shoulders, but I could see it settling heavily on my parents instead. My mother was staring at her hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. My father kept clearing his throat like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Madison broke the silence with a question that would change everything. If you've been supporting them, and I've been getting promoted at work, why do Mom and Dad always compare us like I'm so much more successful? I looked at my cousin, really looked at her, and for the first time noticed the designer handbag that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, the jewelry that seemed too expensive for a regional manager's salary, and the nervous way she kept checking her phone. That's a really good question, Madison. Why don't you tell us about this promotion of yours? Madison's face went through several color changes, finally settling on a sickly green that reminded me of day-old guacamole. She opened and closed her mouth several times without making any sound, like a fish that had suddenly found itself on dry land. It's complicated. She finally managed. Uncle Robert, who was clearly done with family secrets for one evening, crossed his arms. Uncomplicate. The promotion was, well, it wasn't exactly what everyone thinks. Madison's voice got smaller with each word. Actually, they moved me to a different department. A better department, Aunt Patricia asked hopefully. Madison shook her head, tears starting to form in her eyes. A smaller one, with less responsibility and less pay. The silence that followed felt like the moment before thunder strikes. My mother, who had been using Madison as a weapon against me for years, looked like someone had just told her the lottery ticket she'd been bragging about was a fake. Less pay, my father repeated slowly. 60% less, Madison whispered, then looked up at me with desperation in her eyes. That's actually why I was hoping to talk to you tonight, Jaclyn. I thought maybe you could lend me some money. I blinked hard, sure I had misheard. You want to borrow money from me? The useless daughter who never accomplished anything meaningful. I know how this looks, Madison said quickly. But I'm in real trouble here. My brother David, who had been silent through this entire dinner, suddenly spoke up. How much trouble? Madison's composure completely shattered. The tears that had been threatening finally spilled over as she buried her face in her hands. When she looked up again, her mascara had created dark tracks down her cheeks. I took money from my company, she said so quietly we all had to strain to hear her. $15,000. I thought I could pay it back before anyone noticed, but then they did an audit. The collective gasp around the table was audible. Even my parents, who had their own financial secrets, looked shocked. You stole from your employer. Uncle Robert's voice was incredulous. It wasn't stealing, exactly. I was going to pay it back. I just needed it temporarily to keep up with my credit card payments, and my car lease, and the rent on my apartment. Madison was talking faster now, the words tumbling out like water from a broken dam. Mom always said Jaclyn was doing really well and could probably help family members who were struggling. I felt like I'd been slapped. She told you I was doing well. She said you were selfish with money, but that if someone really needed help, you'd probably come through for family. Madison wiped her nose with her napkin. She said you just needed the right approach. My mother was staring at her plate like it held the secrets of the universe. I never said that exactly. Yes, you did, Aunt Carol. You said Jaclyn had plenty of money but was too self-centered to share it unless someone pushed her the right way. Madison turned back to me. That's why I thought if I could make you feel guilty enough, maybe you'd help me avoid going to prison. The manipulation was so blatant, so calculated. that I actually laughed out loud. Let me understand this correctly. You've been living beyond your means, stealing from your company, and facing criminal charges. But somehow, I'm still the family disappointment. The charges haven't been filed yet, Madison said desperately. If I can pay back the money in the next 2 weeks, they might not press charges. I'll pay you back, I swear. David shook his head slowly. Madison, you just admitted you don't have any money and you've been demoted. How exactly would you pay Jaclyn back? I'll figure something out. I always do. Grandmother's voice cut through the conversation like a knife through butter. No, you don't figure things out, Madison. You steal and lie and manipulate people. Just like your aunt here has been doing to Jaclyn. My mother finally looked up from her plate. Mother, that's not fair. Fair. Grandmother's voice rose. Fair would have been telling this family the truth about your financial situation instead of destroying your daughter's reputation to hide your own problems. Fair would have been being grateful that Jaclyn was helping you instead of making her the family scapegoat. Madison was crying harder now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. I never meant for it to go this far. The credit cards were supposed to be temporary. The money from the company was supposed to be a short-term loan. Everything just got out of control. When did it start? I asked, genuinely curious about how deep this deception ran. The credit cards? About 2 years ago. I wanted to look successful at family gatherings. Everyone always talked about how well you were doing in your career, and I felt like I had to compete. I stared at her in amazement. Everyone talked about how well I was doing? At what family gatherings? Because at every family gathering I've attended, Mom spends the entire time pointing out my failures. Madison looked confused. But she always told us privately that you were making good money and choosing not to help family. She said you were selfish but successful. The picture was becoming clearer now, and it was uglier than I had imagined. My mother had been playing both sides, telling me I was a disappointment while telling others I was selfish. Using my supposed success to manipulate Madison while using Madison's supposed success to manipulate me. So you've been stealing money to afford a lifestyle you thought would impress me, while I've been giving away money to support parents who were calling me useless. Does anyone else see the insanity in this? Uncle Robert stood up and walked around the table to put his hand on my shoulder. Jaclyn, I owe you an apology. We all do. We believed the stories your mother told us about you, and we should have known better. Aunt Patricia nodded emphatically. Your mother painted a picture of you as irresponsible and selfish, but that never matched the young woman we saw at family events. You were always polite and kind, but we thought you were just putting on an act. What kind of act? I asked. Like you were pretending to be nice to hide the fact that you wouldn't help family when they needed it, she explained. Your mother made it sound like you had plenty of money but wouldn't share it with anyone. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. While I was literally supporting my parents financially, they were telling everyone I was too selfish to help family. While Madison was stealing money to maintain an image of success, everyone thought she was the responsible one who had her life together. This is so messed up, David said, shaking his head. Jaclyn, I'm sorry. I believed the stuff about you being selfish too. I thought that's why you never offered to help when Mom and Dad were talking about money problems. When did they talk about money problems with you? I asked. All the time. They were always complaining about bills and saying they wished their kids would help out more. I figured they meant you since you supposedly had the better job. I felt like Alice falling down the rabbit hole. David, they've been taking money from me every month for 3 years. When exactly did you think I should have started helping more? He looked genuinely confused. I had no idea they were taking money from you. They made it sound like you never helped at all. Madison had stopped crying and was listening to this conversation with growing horror on her face. So they were taking money from you and telling everyone you weren't helping. Apparently so. And they were telling you I was successful while I was stealing money to pay bills. That appears to be accurate. Madison looked at my mother with something approaching hatred. Aunt Carol, you knew I was struggling. I told you about my financial problems 6 months ago. You knew I was barely making my rent. Why did you keep telling everyone I was doing so well? My mother's face had gone from pale to flushed red. I thought if people believed you were successful, it might help your confidence. Help my confidence. Madison's voice cracked. It made me feel like a complete fraud. I was stealing money to live up to an image you created that had nothing to do with reality. Grandmother shook her head sadly. Carol, what you've done to both these girls is inexcusable. You've turned them against each other and lied to the entire family. I was trying to protect everyone's feelings, my mother said weakly. Whose feelings? Exactly, I asked. Because you certainly weren't protecting mine when you called me useless in front of everyone, and you weren't protecting Madison's when you set her up to fail trying to live up to an impossible standard. The dinner that had started with me being publicly humiliated had somehow turned into a family therapy session where years of lies and manipulation were being unraveled thread by thread. But I had a feeling we were just getting started. Madison wiped her eyes and looked at me with something that might have been respect for the first time in our lives. Jaclyn, I'm sorry, I had no idea what was really going on. I thought you were this selfish person who had everything handed to her and wouldn't share with family. And I thought you were this perfect golden child who could do no wrong in everyone's eyes. I'm facing criminal charges for embezzlement. I don't think anyone would call that perfect. David laughed bitterly. This whole family is built on lies. Is there anything else we should know about? My mother and father exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. After 3 years of financial support and a lifetime of emotional manipulation, I thought I had seen the worst of it. I was wrong. The look that passed between my parents was the kind that happens between two people who share a terrible secret. My grandmother noticed it too, and her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Robert Carroll Henderson, what aren't you telling us? She asked, using my father's full name like she had when he was in trouble as a child. My father loosened his tie and cleared his throat several times before speaking. There might be one other thing. What kind of thing? Uncle Robert asked, though his tone suggested he really didn't want to know. My mother stood up abruptly and started collecting plates, even though most people hadn't finished eating. Can we discuss this later? Thanksgiving dinner isn't the time for family drama. Sit down, Carol, Grandmother said firmly. We're past worrying about appropriate dinner conversation. My mother reluctantly returned to her seat, but she wouldn't look at anyone directly. My father seemed to be studying the pattern on his napkin with intense concentration. Dad, what is it? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. It's about your grandfather's life insurance policy, he said quietly. Grandmother sat up straighter in her chair. What about it? The one he left for Jaclyn, my father continued, his voice getting even quieter. I felt like the room was tilting. What life insurance policy? Grandmother turned to stare at my parents with an expression I'd never seen before, somewhere between rage and disbelief. You didn't tell her. Tell me what? I demanded. Grandmother reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope that looked like it had been handled many times. Your grandfather left you $50,000 in life insurance benefits. The policy matured 3 years ago on your 25th birthday. The number hit me like a physical blow. $50,000. 3 years ago, right around the time my parents had suddenly started having financial emergencies that required my help. I never got any life insurance money, I said slowly. Because your parents told me you had received it and deposited it in your savings account. Grandmother replied, her voice getting sharper with each word. I turned to look at my parents, who both seemed to have developed a sudden fascination with the table centerpiece. Where is my inheritance money? The silence stretched so long that I started to wonder if they were going to answer at all. Finally, my mother spoke without looking up. We used it to help Madison start her consulting business. The room exploded. Uncle Robert started shouting about theft. Aunt Patricia was demanding explanations. David was asking how they could forge my signature. Madison was crying again, but this time it sounded like she might be having trouble breathing. I sat perfectly still in the middle of the chaos, trying to process what I'd just learned. My grandfather, who had loved me dearly and always believed in my potential, had left me $50,000. My parents had stolen it and given it to Madison. Then they had spent 3 years making me pay their bills while telling everyone I was selfish with money. You stole my inheritance, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. The room went quiet again. My mother finally looked at me, and I could see guilt written across her face like a confession. We didn't steal it. We redirected it to help family. By forging my signature and lying to grandmother about what happened to the money, my father cleared his throat. The business opportunity was time-sensitive. Madison needed startup capital, and you were young. We thought you'd waste the money on something frivolous, so instead you gave it to Madison, who spent it on designer clothes and a luxury car instead of actually starting a business. Madison looked up from her hands, Mascara still streaked down her face. I did try to start the business. I rented office space and bought equipment and hired a consultant to help with marketing. What kind of business? Uncle Robert asked. Personal financial consulting, Madison said, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone. You started a financial consulting business with stolen money while you were already in debt? David asked incredulously. I thought if I could make it successful, I could pay back the startup money and solve all my financial problems at the same time. What happened to the business? I asked. Madison's voice was barely a whisper. I spent most of the money on office, rent, and equipment, but I couldn't get any clients. Financial consulting is harder than I thought, and I didn't really have the right qualifications. The business failed after 8 months. What happened to the equipment and office stuff? I had to sell it all to pay rent on my apartment. I lost about $30,000 total. I felt like I was drowning in layers of betrayal. So you took my $50,000 inheritance, lost $30,000 of it on a failed business, and spent the rest on personal expenses. Meanwhile, I've been supporting our parents financially because they claimed they couldn't afford their bills. We genuinely couldn't afford our bills, my father said defensively. The money we gave Madison was for investment purposes. We couldn't use that for day-to-day expenses. It wasn't your money to invest. Grandmother's voice was louder than I'd ever heard it. That was Jaclyn's inheritance, left specifically for her by my husband. You had no right to touch it. My mother tried one more time to justify their actions. We thought we were helping both girls. Madison needed startup capital, and Jaclyn was young and irresponsible. We figured by the time she was older and more mature, Madison's business would be successful enough to pay back the initial investment. But you never told me about any of this, I pointed out. How was I supposed to get my money back from a business I didn't even know existed? We were going to tell you when the business started making money, my father said. Madison looked up with fresh tears in her eyes. The business never made money. I barely had any clients. Most of the startup money went to rent and equipment that I never really used. So my inheritance is just gone? I asked. Madison still has some of the equipment, my mother said hopefully. Maybe she could sell it and give you the money. Madison shook her head. I sold everything months ago to keep up with my credit card payments. There's nothing left. Uncle Robert stood up and paced to the window. This is criminal fraud. They forged Jaclyn's signature, stole her inheritance, and lied to cover it up. This isn't just family drama anymore. Grandmother was looking at my parents like she didn't recognize them. How could you do this? How could you steal from your own daughter and then make her support you financially? We didn't plan for it to work out this way, my mother said desperately. We thought Madison's business would succeed and everything would work out fine. But when it didn't succeed, you didn't tell me about it. Instead, you started asking me for money to pay your bills while you knew you had stolen $50,000 from me. We were embarrassed about the business failure, my father said. So you decided to compound the problem by making me pay your expenses instead of finding a way to make things right. David was shaking his head in amazement. This is unbelievable. You stole Jaclyn's inheritance, gave it to Madison for a business that failed, then spent 3 years making Jaclyn pay your bills while telling everyone she was selfish. How is this real life? Madison spoke up quietly. I need to say something. I didn't know the startup money came from Jaclyn's inheritance. Aunt Carol and Uncle Robert told me it was family money that was available for business investments. Did you think it was strange that they suddenly had $50,000 available for business investments while claiming they couldn't afford their own bills? I asked. Madison looked genuinely confused. They told me the business investment money was separate from household money. They said it was from a family fund that could only be used for specific purposes. A family fund. Uncle Robert turned from the window. What family fund? That's what they called it. They said grandmother had set up an investment fund to help grandchildren with business opportunities. Grandmother's face was getting redder by the minute. I never set up any such fund. The only money I had available for grandchildren was your grandfather's life insurance policy, which was specifically left to Jaclyn. The lies were so numerous and complicated that I was starting to lose track of who had been deceived about what. My parents had not only stolen my money but created an elaborate fiction to justify it to Madison. They had manipulated both of us while protecting themselves from having to take responsibility for their financial problems. How did you forge my signature? I asked. My father looked uncomfortable. We had your signature from other documents, tax forms and things like that. You practiced forging my signature. We just wanted to handle the paperwork efficiently. Efficiently. I laughed, but it sounded hollow even to me. You efficiently committed fraud. My mother was crying now, quiet tears that she kept wiping away with her napkin. We never meant for it to get this complicated. We just wanted to help Madison, and we thought you were too young to handle that much money responsibly. I was 25 years old. I had a college degree and a full-time job. What exactly made you think I couldn't handle my own inheritance? You were always so impulsive, my mother said weakly. When? When was I impulsive with money? She couldn't answer because there wasn't an answer. I had been financially responsible since I got my first part-time job at 16. I had paid my own way through college, never missed a bill payment, and maintained excellent credit. The impulsive, irresponsible daughter they described existed only in their imagination, but there was still something bothering me about this whole story. If they had stolen my inheritance 3 years ago, and Madison's business had failed shortly after that, why had they continued lying to grandmother about what happened to the money? Grandmother, when did you last ask Mom about my inheritance money? I ask about it regularly, dear. I wanted to make sure you were managing it well and that it was helping you build a good foundation for your future. And what did they tell you? They said you had been very responsible with it and were using it for long-term investments and building up your emergency fund. They said you were grateful for your grandfather's generosity and that the money was giving you financial security. I turned back to my parents. So for 3 years, you've been lying to grandmother, telling her I received money that you actually stole and gave to Madison. You've been lying to me about why you needed financial help. You've been lying to the family about my character and my financial situation. And you've been lying to Madison about where her startup money came from. My father nodded miserably. When you put it like that, it sounds worse than we intended. How did you intend it to sound? He couldn't answer that either. Madison wiped her eyes and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Jaclyn, I'll find a way to pay you back. I don't know how, but I will. With what money? You just told us you're facing criminal charges and you've been demoted at work. I'll figure something out. Like you figured out your business plan. Madison flinched, but she nodded. I know I messed up, but I want to make this right. Uncle Robert returned to the table and sat down heavily. The question now is what we do about all of this. We're talking about serious crimes here. Identity theft, fraud, forgery. Grandmother was still staring at my parents like she couldn't believe they were her own family. I trusted you to handle this honorably, and you betrayed everyone involved. What do you want us to do, Mother? My mother asked desperately. We can't undo what's already done. You can start by taking responsibility for what you've done and figuring out how to make restitution. With what money? My father asked. We're barely keeping up with our current bills, even with Jaclyn's help. The casual way he mentioned my ongoing financial support, as if it were just a normal part of their budget rather than the result of their lies and manipulation, pushed me over an edge I didn't even know I was approaching. I pulled out my phone again, but this time I wasn't opening my banking app. I was opening my voice recorder. What are you doing? My mother asked nervously. Making sure we have a record of this conversation, I said as I pressed record, because apparently the only way to get truth out of this family is to create evidence that can't be denied later. The sight of my phone recording the conversation seemed to flip a switch in my father's personality. His face, which had been showing at least some remorse, hardened into an expression I recognized from childhood arguments. Turn that off, he said firmly. We're family. We don't record each other. We're family, so we don't steal from each other either. But that didn't stop you. This is different. Recording private family conversations is a violation of trust. I almost choked on the irony. A violation of trust? You want to talk about violations of trust? Turn off the phone, Jaclyn. His voice had taken on that authoritative tone he used when I was a teenager, and he wanted to end an argument by pulling rank. No. The single word hung between us like a challenge. My father looked stunned, as if no one had ever refused a direct order from him before. Excuse me, I said no. I'm not turning off the phone. And since we're apparently having a conversation about trust violations, let me check something else while I have my phone out. I opened my credit monitoring app, something I checked monthly to make sure my excellent credit score stayed excellent. What I saw there made my stomach drop into my shoes. Dad, do you want to explain why there are 3 credit cards I've never heard of showing up on my credit report? The color drained out of his face so fast I thought he might faint. What are you talking about? Platinum MasterCard opened 18 months ago. Current balance $8,400. Visa Signature Card opened 14 months ago. Current balance $9,600. American Express Card opened 11 months ago. Current balance $10,200. I looked up from my phone. Total debt in my name that I didn't authorize, $28,200. The silence that followed was the kind that happens right before a tornado touches down. I could see Uncle Robert's hands clench into fists. Grandmother was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. Madison looked like she was going to throw up. "You opened credit cards in my name," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "We were going to pay them off before you found out," my mother said quickly. "With what money? The inheritance money you stole? The money you've been taking from me every month? Or were you planning to steal more money from somewhere else?" "We needed the credit for emergency expenses," my father said defensively. "What emergencies? Medical bills? Car repairs? The furnace replacement? Those aren't emergencies, Dad. Those are normal life expenses that adults plan for and save money to handle." David stood up from his chair and started pacing behind the table. "You opened credit cards in Jaclyn's name without telling her. We used her excellent credit to get better interest rates," my mother said, as if this somehow justified identity theft. "And then you maxed them out. The balances aren't that high," my father protested. $28,000 isn't high. Uncle Robert's voice was getting louder. "On top of the $43,000 she's already given you and the $50,000 inheritance you stole." I was doing math in my head, and the numbers were staggering. "So in 3 years, you've cost me $121,000. Plus whatever damage you've done to my credit score by carrying high balances on cards I didn't know existed." Madison was staring at her hands. "I didn't know about any of this. The credit cards or the monthly payments. I thought Jaclyn was just selfish, not that she was actually supporting you financially. We told you she was selfish because we didn't want you to feel guilty about accepting the business investment money," my mother explained. "You told her I was selfish to cover up the fact that you were stealing from me." "We weren't stealing. We were managing family resources." "Managing family resources." I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "You stole my inheritance, forged my signature, opened credit accounts in my name without permission, and lied to everyone in our family about what was happening. In what universe is that managing resources?" My father stood up too, and I could see him shifting into the aggressive stance he took when he felt cornered. "You're being dramatic, Jaclyn. Families help each other through difficult times. We raised you and supported you for 18 years, and I've paid you back for that support plus interest. I've given you more money in 3 years than you spent on raising me. That's not how family works." "You're right, that's not how family works. Family doesn't steal from each other and lie about it for years," my mother tried to interject. "We were planning to tell you everything once our financial situation stabilized." "When exactly was that going to happen? You've been taking money from me for 3 years and the situation has only gotten worse. You've gone from needing help with bills to committing identity theft. The credit cards were a temporary solution," my father said. "Temporary? You've been making minimum payments with my money for over a year. There's nothing temporary about $28,000 in debt." David stopped pacing and turned to face our parents. "You know what the crazy part is? Jaclyn has been helping you this whole time, and you've still been making her feel guilty about not doing enough." "What do you mean?" Uncle Robert asked. "Every time Jaclyn came to family events, Mom would make comments about how she never offered to help with anything. She'd talk about how Madison was so thoughtful and generous, and how Jaclyn only thought about herself." Madison looked up from her hands. "But Jaclyn was helping. She was paying their mortgage." "Right, but the rest of us didn't know that. So we all thought Jaclyn was this selfish person who had money but wouldn't help family." Grandmother shook her head slowly. "They turned everyone against her while she was literally keeping them afloat financially." "It wasn't intentional," my mother protested. "Of course it was intentional," I said. "You told me different stories than you told everyone else specifically to manipulate all of us. You told me I was disappointing and needed to do more. You told them I was selfish and wouldn't help anyone. You told Madison she was successful while giving her stolen money. And you told Grandmother I was responsibly managing an inheritance that you had actually stolen. We were trying to protect everyone's feelings," my father said. "Whose feelings were you protecting when you called me the most useless child you have in front of our entire family?" He couldn't answer that. Or when you spent years making me feel guilty for not doing more to help while I was actually supporting you financially. Still no answer. Or when you opened credit accounts in my name that could destroy my credit rating and financial future. My mother started crying again. We never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far. And when it got complicated, instead of telling the truth and taking responsibility, you doubled down on the lies and made everything worse. David sat back down and put his head in his hands. This is so messed up. Jaclyn, I'm sorry. I helped them with paperwork sometimes. I thought you had given permission for the financial stuff. My head snapped up. What paperwork? Just basic stuff. Helping Dad organize bank statements and bills. I never looked at them closely. Did you help with credit card applications? David's face went pale. Oh no. Dad asked me to help him scan some documents for online applications. He said they were for business credit cards for some consulting work he was doing. Those were the credit card applications for accounts in my name. I don't know. Maybe. He just said he needed help with the scanning because he's not good with technology. Uncle Robert stood up and walked over to David. What exactly did you help scan? Bank statements, tax returns, employment verification forms, things like that. In whose name? David looked like he was going to be sick. I thought they were Dad's documents, but some of them might have had Jaclyn's information on them. Oh my God, Madison breathed. David, you helped them commit identity theft. I didn't know, David protested. Dad told me the documents were his. I never read them carefully. My father tried to defend David. He was just helping with basic paperwork. He didn't know what the applications were for. But you knew, I said. You knew exactly what those applications were for when you asked David to help scan my personal financial documents. We needed the documents to prove income and creditworthiness. To prove my income and my creditworthiness for credit cards that you were applying for in my name. We were going to pay them off before you found out. With what money, Dad? What money were you going to use to pay off $28,000 in credit card debt? He couldn't answer because there was no answer. They had no plan beyond continuing to take money from me and hoping I wouldn't notice the growing damage to my financial future. Uncle Robert walked back to the window and stood there for a long moment before turning around. Jaclyn, what do you want to do about this? The question hung in the air like smoke. What did I want to do? I wanted my parents to acknowledge the harm they had caused. I wanted my inheritance money back. I wanted the credit card debt resolved. I wanted my family to stop treating me like a disappointment while secretly depending on me financially. But mostly, I wanted them to understand that what they had done wasn't just financial theft. It was emotional abuse. They had systematically destroyed my relationships with other family members while exploiting my love and loyalty for their own benefit. I want them to take responsibility, I said finally. I want them to stop lying and start telling the truth about what's been happening. And if they won't, I looked at my parents, who were both staring at me with expressions that mixed fear and defiance. They were afraid of the consequences of their actions, but they were still defiant about their right to have taken those actions in the first place. Then I'll make the decision for them. I held up my phone, showing that it was still recording. Everything they've admitted to tonight is documented. Identity theft, fraud, forgery, the credit cards, the stolen inheritance, the lies to family members, all of it. My mother's face went white. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. You've committed multiple felonies, and you've damaged my credit, my finances, and my relationships with family members. This isn't just family drama anymore. This is criminal behavior. My father tried one more time to regain control of the situation. Jaclyn, we're your parents. We made mistakes, but we're still family. You can't seriously be considering involving the police in family business. You made it police business when you committed crimes. I'm just deciding whether to report those crimes or give you a chance to make things right on your own. What would making things right look like? David asked quietly. I thought about that question for a moment. What would making things right actually look like? Could anything really repair the damage that had been done to our family relationships? Could I ever trust my parents again after learning the extent of their deception? Complete honesty, I said finally. No more lies, no more manipulation, no more hiding behind excuses. They admit to everyone what they've done. They figure out how to repay every dollar they've stolen, and they get help for whatever psychological issues make them think this behavior is acceptable. And if we refuse? My father asked. Then I'll let the legal system handle it. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. For the first time in my life, my parents were afraid of me instead of the other way around. They had finally pushed me past the point where family loyalty outweighed justice. The question was whether they were smart enough to understand that. My father's face went through several expressions before settling on something between anger and desperation. You're threatening your own family. I'm offering my own family a choice. Take responsibility and make restitution, or face criminal charges. That's more generous than you've been with me. My mother reached across the table as if she wanted to touch my hand, but I pulled back. Jaclyn, honey, please think about this rationally. If you involve the police, it will destroy our family permanently. You destroyed our family when you decided to build it on lies and theft. I'm just deciding whether to let you fix it yourselves or let the courts handle it. Uncle Robert cleared his throat. What exactly are you proposing? I had been thinking about this while they tried to justify their actions. Complete financial transparency. Every account, every debt, every asset gets disclosed to a family financial advisor that I choose. Full confession to every family member about what's been happening. A structured repayment plan for every dollar they've stolen. And mandatory financial counseling to figure out how they got to the point where stealing from their own daughter seemed reasonable. That's humiliating, my mother protested. Not as humiliating as a criminal trial. My father was trying a different approach. Jaclyn, be reasonable. We can't repay that kind of money all at once. We're already struggling financially. Then you'll repay it over time. With interest. What if we can't make the payments? Then you'll face the consequences of your choices. David looked back and forth between me and our parents. Jaclyn's being more than fair. You committed serious crimes. Most people wouldn't even offer an alternative to criminal prosecution. Madison spoke up quietly. I want to help with the repayment if I can. I know I spent money that belonged to Jaclyn, even if I didn't know where it came from. You're facing criminal charges yourself, I pointed out. How exactly would you help? I don't know yet, but I want to try. This whole thing started because I was trying to keep up with an image that wasn't even real. The least I can do is help fix the damage. Grandmother had been quietly listening to this entire exchange, but now she spoke up with steel in her voice. Carol and Robert, what Jaclyn is offering you is more mercy than you deserve. If you refuse her terms, I will personally make sure you face the full consequences of your actions. My mother looked shocked. Mother, surely you don't mean that. I absolutely mean it. You stole from your own daughter and lied to the entire family. You destroyed relationships and betrayed trust in ways that I never thought possible. If you're too proud or too stubborn to accept Jaclyn's generous offer, then you can explain your choices to a judge. My father was looking around the table, trying to read faces and calculate his options. What he saw clearly wasn't encouraging. Uncle Robert was nodding along with grandmother's words. Aunt Patricia was looking at him with disgust. David was supporting me openly. Even Madison, who had been the beneficiary of their manipulation, was offering to help me instead of them. How much time do we have to decide? My father asked. You're deciding right now, I said. I'm not leaving here tonight without a clear answer about which direction this goes. That's not enough time to think through all the implications. You've had 3 years to think through the implications. You chose to keep digging the hole deeper instead of telling the truth and asking for help. My mother tried emotional manipulation one more time. Jaclyn, I'm your mother. I know I made mistakes, but surely that counts for something. It counts for why I'm offering you a choice instead of just calling the police tonight. We could lose everything, our house, our retirement, our standing in the community. You could also lose your freedom if you're convicted of multiple felonies. Uncle Robert leaned forward in his chair. Carol, what exactly did you think was going to happen when all of this eventually came to light? We thought we could fix it before anyone found out. How? Your financial situation has gotten worse every year, not better. You've gone from needing help with bills to committing identity theft. What part of that trajectory suggested you were fixing anything? My mother couldn't answer that because there was no reasonable answer. They had been operating on wishful thinking and denial rather than any actual plan to resolve their problems. David stood up and walked around the table to stand behind my chair. Mom, Dad, I love you both, but what you've done to Jaclyn is unforgivable. She's offering you a way to make things right instead of going to prison. If you refuse this offer, I'll never speak to either of you again. David. my mother exclaimed. I'm serious. I've watched Jaclyn get treated like garbage by this family for years while she was secretly supporting you. I believed the lies about her being selfish because I trusted you to tell me the truth. Now I find out that everything I thought I knew about my own sister was based on manipulation and deception. Uncle Robert nodded emphatically. David's right, Jaclyn. Your parents owe you more than money. They owe you a public acknowledgement of how wrong they've been about you. Aunt Patricia had been quiet through most of this conversation, but now she spoke up. Carol, I'm ashamed to be your sister-in-law. What you've done to Jaclyn is despicable. My mother looked around the table at faces that had once been sympathetic and saw nothing but condemnation. You're all turning against us. You turned us against Jaclyn first, Aunt Patricia replied. We're just correcting the record. Madison wiped her eyes and looked at my parents with something approaching hatred. You made me think I was competing with someone who had everything handed to her when she was actually working harder than any of us and supporting you financially. You set up a rivalry based on complete lies. We thought it would motivate both of you to work harder, my father said weakly. It motivated me to steal money from my employer. Madison shot back. And it motivated Jaclyn to work herself to death, trying to prove she wasn't the disappointment you told everyone she was. Grandmother shook her head sadly. What you've done to these girls is psychological abuse. You've manipulated their relationship with each other and with the rest of the family to serve your own purposes. We never intended to hurt anyone, my mother said. But you did hurt people, I said firmly. You hurt me every time you called me selfish while I was paying your bills. You hurt Madison by making her feel like she had to live up to an impossible standard. You hurt David by making him complicit in your schemes. You hurt Grandmother by lying about my inheritance. You hurt Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia by making them believe false things about my character. The damage they had caused was so extensive and so deliberate that I was starting to wonder if there was any way to repair it. How do you rebuild trust with people who had spent years systematically destroying relationships for their own benefit? My father seemed to realize he was out of options. What exactly would this repayment plan look like? Well, work out the details with a financial advisor, but generally speaking, you'll pay me back every dollar you've stolen plus interest. The credit card debt gets transferred back to accounts in your name, which means you'll have to qualify for credit on your own income and credit rating. And you'll pay for credit monitoring services to make sure my credit report gets cleaned up. How long would we have to pay it back? However long it takes. This isn't a short-term payment plan. This is a long-term commitment to make restitution for serious crimes. And the family confession. You'll explain to everyone exactly what you did and how you did it. No more lies about my character or my financial situation. No more excuses about family loyalty or good intentions. My mother was crying again, but this time it seemed like she was beginning to understand the real consequences of her actions. Everyone will hate us. Everyone should hate what you did. Whether they hate you personally depends on how you handle taking responsibility for it. My father looked at my mother, and some silent communication passed between them. He turned back to me with defeat written across his face. What do we need to do to accept your terms? First, you need to say it out loud, on the recording. Full acknowledgement of what you did and commitment to making restitution. My mother looked at the phone in my hands like it was a poisonous snake. You're really going to make us confess to our crimes on tape? I'm going to make you confess to your crimes on tape so that you can't change your story later and claim this conversation never happened. My father nodded slowly. What do you want us to say? The truth. All of it. In your own words. He took a deep breath and looked directly at my phone. My name is Robert Henderson. 3 years ago, my wife Carol and I forged our daughter Jaclyn's signature to access $50,000 in life insurance benefits that had been left to her by her grandfather. We gave this money to our niece Madison to start a business venture without telling Jaclyn about the inheritance or asking her permission to use the money. My mother picked up where he left off, her voice shaky but clear. When Madison's business failed and we couldn't repay the money we had stolen, we began asking Jaclyn for financial help with our bills without telling her about the inheritance money we had already taken. Over the past 3 years, we have taken more than $40,000 from Jaclyn in direct payments, my father continued. We also opened 3 credit card accounts in Jaclyn's name without her knowledge or permission, and we have accumulated approximately $28,000 in debt on those accounts. We used Jaclyn's excellent credit rating to qualify for cards that we could not have obtained on our own. Throughout this time, my mother added, we told family members that Jaclyn was selfish and unwilling to help with family financial needs, while we were actually receiving significant financial support from her. We also told Madison that Jaclyn was successful but self-centered, and we told Jaclyn that Madison was successful and responsible, creating false competition between them. My father finished the confession. We acknowledge that our actions constitute identity theft, fraud, and forgery. We accept responsibility for our crimes, and we commit to making full financial restitution to Jaclyn according to terms that she will establish. I stopped the recording and looked around the table at my family members, who were all staring at my parents with various combinations of shock, anger, and disappointment. Now we figure out how to move forward, I said. The confession had drained all the fight out of my parents, but as the reality of their situation sank in, I could see my mother's desperation starting to turn into defiance again. Fine, she said, her voice getting stronger. We've confessed, but if you think we're going to spend the rest of our lives groveling and paying you back for money we used to help family, you're mistaken. I blinked in surprise. Excuse me. You heard me. We raised you for 18 years. We sacrificed for your education and your future. If you want to destroy your own family over money, that's your choice. But we're not going to let you hold this over our heads forever. My father was nodding along with her words, his earlier defeat replaced by renewed stubbornness. Your mother's right. We made mistakes, but we're still your parents. If you can't forgive family for financial disagreements, then maybe you're not the person we thought you were. The audacity was breathtaking. Even after confessing to multiple felonies, they were still trying to make this my fault and position themselves as the victims. Financial disagreements. I repeated slowly. You think fraud and identity theft are financial disagreements? We think family should stick together instead of threatening each other with legal action, my mother said firmly. Uncle Robert stood up so fast his chair fell over backward. Are you seriously trying to guilt-trip Jaclyn after everything you just confessed to? We're trying to remind everyone that family forgiveness is more important than money, my father replied. Forgiveness. Grandmother's voice was ice cold. You want forgiveness without restitution or accountability. We want our family to act like family instead of like strangers in a courtroom, my mother said. David laughed bitterly. You want family loyalty? Where was family loyalty when you were stealing Jaclyn's inheritance? Where was family loyalty when you were destroying her credit? Where was family loyalty when you spent years convincing us she was selfish while she was literally keeping you from losing your house? We never intended for things to get so complicated, my father said. But they did get complicated, I said. And when they got complicated, you made them worse instead of making them better. You had dozens of opportunities to tell the truth and ask for help, but instead you chose to keep lying and stealing. My mother stood up from her chair and crossed her arms. If you want to choose money over family, that's your decision, Jaclyn. But don't expect us to participate in our own humiliation. The room went dead silent. She had just rejected my offer and chosen criminal prosecution over taking responsibility for her actions. Carol, grandmother said slowly, do you understand what you just said? I said I'm not going to let my own daughter blackmail me. She's not blackmailing you. She's offering you a chance to avoid prison. By making us grovel and beg and confess our mistakes to everyone we know. That's not forgiveness, that's punishment. Uncle Robert picked up his fallen chair and sat back down. It is punishment. You committed crimes and betrayed your family's trust. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? We thought our family would stand by us instead of treating us like criminals, my father said. You are criminals, David said flatly. You've confessed to multiple felonies. The only question now is whether you face those charges in family court or criminal court. Madison looked up from her hands, her face streaked with tears. Aunt Carol, Uncle Robert, please listen to what you're saying. Jaclyn is trying to help you avoid going to prison. How can you turn that down? We're turning it down because we refuse to be treated like criminals by our own family, my mother said. But you are criminals, Madison pointed out. I'm facing criminal charges myself, so I understand what you're looking at. If someone offered me a way to avoid prosecution, I would take it in a heartbeat. That's different. You stole from strangers. We helped family. The delusion was so complete that I wondered if they actually believed their own words. Even after confessing to theft, fraud, and identity theft, They still genuinely seemed to think they were the victims in this situation. Aunt Patricia had been watching this exchange with growing horror. "Carol, I can't believe what I'm hearing. Your daughter is offering you mercy you don't deserve, and you're throwing it back in her face." "I'm refusing to let her destroy our family over money," my mother replied. "You already destroyed your family when you started stealing and lying. Jaclyn is offering you a chance to rebuild it. By humiliating us in front of everyone we know. You humiliated yourselves when you committed crimes. Taking responsibility isn't additional humiliation, it's the first step toward healing." My father tried a different approach. "Jaclyn, think about what you're doing. If you follow through on this threat, your mother and I could go to prison. Is that really what you want? What I want is for you to take responsibility for your actions and make restitution for the harm you've caused." We offered to take responsibility. "No, you offered to confess on tape and then immediately tried to back out of the consequences. That's not taking responsibility. That's trying to manipulate me into dropping my demands. We're trying to find a solution that doesn't destroy our family. The family was destroyed when you built it on lies and theft. I'm trying to find a way to rebuild it on truth and accountability." My mother sat back down and looked around the table at family members who had once supported her unconditionally. "I can't believe you're all choosing her side over ours." "We're not choosing sides," Uncle Robert said. "We're choosing right over wrong. We're choosing truth over lies," Grandmother added. "We're choosing justice over convenience," David said. Madison nodded emphatically. "We're choosing accountability over enabling." Aunt Patricia leaned forward in her chair. "Carol, what did you think was going to happen when the truth came out? Did you really believe you could steal from your daughter and lie to your family indefinitely? We thought we could fix things before anyone got hurt. But people did get hurt. Jaclyn got hurt financially and emotionally. Madison got hurt by being set up to fail. David got hurt by being made complicit in your schemes. I got hurt by being lied to about my niece's character. Your own mother got hurt by being deceived about her husband's final gift to his granddaughter." My mother looked around the table one more time, and I could see the moment when she realized she had no support left. Every person in the room was looking at her with disappointment or disgust. "Fine," she said quietly. "You win, Jaclyn. Well, do whatever you want." "It's not about winning," I said. "It's about making things right." "Is it? Because it feels like punishment." "It is punishment, but it's also an opportunity to earn back some of the trust you've destroyed." My father nodded reluctantly. "What do we need to do?" "Exactly what I outlined before. Complete financial transparency, public confession to family members, structured repayment plan, and mandatory counseling. And if we do all of that, you won't press criminal charges." "If you do all of that successfully and stick to the agreements we make, I won't press criminal charges. How will we know you won't change your mind later?" Uncle Robert answered before I could. "Because unlike you, Jaclyn keeps her word." The room fell silent again as my parents absorbed the reality of their situation. They had gambled on family loyalty outweighing justice, and they had lost. Now they were facing consequences they had never seriously considered before. "When do we start?" my father asked quietly. "Tonight," I said. "We start with complete honesty about your financial situation. Every account, every debt, every asset. I want to see bank statements, credit reports, tax returns, everything." "Tonight," my mother protested. "We need time to gather documents. You've had 3 years to gather documents. If you don't have them organized by now, that tells us something about how you've been managing your finances." David stood up and walked toward the door. "I'll go get their financial files. I know where they keep everything." "David, wait!" my father called after him. "No more waiting, Dad. Jaclyn has been more than patient. It's time for complete transparency." As David left the room, I looked around the table at the family members who had supported me through this confrontation. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. "Thank you," I said quietly. "All of you, for believing me and standing up for what's right." Grandmother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "We should have seen what was happening sooner. We should have questioned the stories we were being told about you. The stories were convincing because they came from people you trusted. Which makes the betrayal even worse," Uncle Robert said. "They didn't just steal your money, Jaclyn. They stole years of family relationships by turning us against you." Madison nodded emphatically. "I feel horrible about the way I've treated you at family events. I believed all the things Aunt Carol said about you being selfish, and I let it influence how I acted toward you. We all did, Aunt Patricia said. We owe you apologies for that. You don't owe me anything. You believed what you were told by people who should have been trustworthy. David came back into the room carrying 2 banker's boxes full of documents. Here is everything I could find. Bank statements going back 5 years, tax returns, insurance policies, medical bills, credit card statements. I looked at the boxes and realized this was going to be a long night. But for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was finally going to get complete answers about what had been done with my money. Let's get started, I said. 6 months later, I sat in my parents' living room for our monthly financial review meeting, looking at documents that told a completely different story than the chaos we had discovered on Thanksgiving night. My parents had managed to refinance their house with Uncle Robert's help as a co-signer, using the equity to pay down some of their debt. They had both taken second jobs, with Mom working evenings at a retail store and Dad doing weekend maintenance work for a property management company. Their combined extra income was barely enough to cover their repayment obligations to me, but they were managing to meet every deadline. The credit cards that had been opened in my name were officially closed and transferred to accounts under their names, though their damaged credit meant they were paying significantly higher interest rates. My own credit score had been fully restored with the help of the lawyer Uncle Robert had recommended, and I now received monthly credit monitoring reports to ensure nothing like this happened again. Madison had avoided prison time by plea bargaining down to community service and restitution, working weekends at a financial literacy nonprofit to fulfill her service hours. The irony of teaching other people about responsible money management wasn't lost on any of us, but she seemed to be taking the work seriously. She had moved in with Uncle Robert temporarily to save money and was slowly paying back her portion of my stolen inheritance. My mother looked up from the spreadsheet where she tracked every payment. This month we're caught up on the regular payments, and we managed an extra $200 toward the principal balance. That's good, I said, noting the information in my own records. The relationship between us was still fragile, built on careful politeness and structured interactions rather than the natural warmth that should exist between family members. But it was honest for the first time in years, which felt like progress. How are the counseling sessions going? I asked. My father answered, Doctor Martinez says we're making progress on understanding the thought patterns that led to our poor decisions. She's helping us recognize when we're rationalizing behavior that we know is wrong. The family counselor had been my non-negotiable requirement, and it seemed to be helping them understand the psychological manipulation they had been engaging in. They were learning to identify their own justifications and excuses before those patterns led them into more destructive choices. We had a breakthrough session last week, my mother added quietly, about the way we treated you compared to how we treated Madison, Doctor. Martinez helped us see how we were setting both of you up to fail in different ways. That admission represented months of work. In the beginning, they had attended counseling sessions mainly to fulfill their obligation to me, but gradually they seemed to be developing genuine insight into their behavior patterns. David walked in from the kitchen carrying coffee for everyone. He had indeed moved in with Uncle Robert after Thanksgiving, but he came to these monthly meetings to show support for the family rebuilding process. His relationship with our parents was still strained, but he was committed to helping them succeed at their restitution plan. How are things at the second job, Mom? He asked as he handed her a mug. Exhausting, but manageable. The evening shift at the store is actually kind of peaceful. It gives me time to think about things without all the distractions at home. My father nodded. The maintenance work is physically hard, but it's honest work, and it feels good to be earning the money we're paying back instead of just taking it from Jaclyn. That acknowledgement would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. The parents who had spent years justifying their financial exploitation of me were now taking responsibility for earning back what they had taken. Madison arrived a few minutes later, looking tired but more grounded than I had seen her in years. Her community service work seemed to be giving her perspective on financial responsibility that her previous lifestyle had never required. How was the workshop this weekend? I asked her. Really eye-opening. We worked with single mothers who are trying to get out of debt, and it made me realize how privileged I was to have family support even when I was making terrible decisions. Some of these women are dealing with medical debt or job loss or other emergencies, not just bad spending choices like mine. She had sold her luxury car and was driving a reliable used sedan that she had purchased with cash. Her apartment was smaller and less expensive, but she seemed more comfortable with herself than she had when she was trying to maintain an image she couldn't afford. "I've been thinking about something," she continued. "Once I finish paying back my portion of your inheritance, I want to keep contributing to a fund for other family members who might need emergency help. Like a legitimate family fund, not the fake one Aunt Carol told me about." Grandmother, who had joined us for these monthly meetings, smiled approvingly. "Your grandfather would like that idea. He always believed in helping family, but he also believed in doing it honestly and transparently." The mention of my grandfather's values brought up something that had been weighing on my mind. I've been thinking about the inheritance money too. Specifically, what he would have wanted me to do with it. Everyone looked at me expectantly. "I think he would have wanted it to help our family become stronger and more honest with each other. The money is gone and it's going to take years for Mom and Dad to pay it back. But the real value of his gift might be that it forced us to confront the lies we were telling ourselves and each other." My mother's eyes filled with tears, but they seemed like healing tears rather than manipulative ones. "Do you think we'll ever be a normal family again?" "I don't know what normal means for us," I answered honestly. "But I think we can be a truthful family, and maybe that's better than normal." The conversation was interrupted by Uncle Robert, who had driven over to pick up Madison after the meeting. He looked around the room at the careful but genuine interactions happening between family members who had spent years hurting each other. "How are we doing?" he asked. "Better," David answered. "Slowly, but better." Uncle Robert had become the unofficial family mediator, helping to facilitate discussions when tensions ran high and ensuring that everyone was sticking to their commitments. His support had been crucial during the months when trust was too damaged for direct communication to work effectively. "Any issues I should know about?" he asked. "Actually, yes," my father said. "I want to add something to next month's payment." I looked up in surprise. "Add what?" "Interest. Real interest, calculated at market rates for personal loans. We've been paying back the principal amounts, but we haven't been paying you for the opportunity cost of the money we took." This was significant because it represented them acknowledging that their theft had cost me more than just the actual dollars they had taken. The money I had given them over 3 years could have been invested or saved for my own future. "That's not necessary," I said. "We agreed on the current payment schedule. It's necessary for us," my mother said firmly. "We need to make this right completely, not just partially." Dr. Martinez had apparently helped them understand that true restitution meant more than just returning stolen property. It meant acknowledging the full scope of harm they had caused and taking responsibility for repairing it entirely. Grandmother nodded approvingly. "That's the kind of thinking your grandfather would have respected." As the meeting wrapped up and family members began to leave, Madison lingered behind to talk with me privately. "I know this might sound strange," she said, "but I'm grateful for everything that happened. Not grateful that we hurt you, but grateful that the truth finally came out." "Why?" "Because I was drowning. The lifestyle I was trying to maintain, the lies I was telling about my success, the money I was stealing to keep up appearances. It was all unsustainable, but I couldn't see a way out that didn't involve admitting I was a complete fraud." She sat down across from me on the couch where this whole confrontation had started 6 months earlier. When the truth came out at Thanksgiving, it was terrifying, but it was also liberating. For the first time in years, I didn't have to pretend to be someone I wasn't. "How do you feel about our relationship now?" I asked. "Like we're starting over? Like we're getting to know each other as real people instead of the characters Aunt Carol created for us." That felt accurate. The competitive dynamic between us had been entirely artificial, based on false information and manipulated comparisons. Now we were developing a relationship based on who we actually were, rather than who our parents had told us we were. "I have something for you," Madison said, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a small wrapped package and handed it to me. Inside was a simple silver bracelet with a charm that read, "Truth." "It's not much," she said, "but I wanted you to have something that represents what you taught me about the importance of honesty." I put the bracelet on my wrist, surprised by how much the gesture meant to me. "Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on our family. A lot of people would have pressed charges and walked away from all of us." I thought about it. "What changed your mind?" I considered the question carefully. I realized that destroying our family wouldn't repair the damage that had been done. but rebuilding it on truthful foundations might. As Madison left to catch her ride with Uncle Robert, I sat alone in my parents' living room and thought about the long journey from that terrible Thanksgiving dinner to this moment of tentative healing. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Proud of how you handled everything tonight. See you next month." Another text came from grandmother. "Your grandfather would be proud of the woman you've become." And finally, a text from Uncle Robert. "Family dinner at my house Sunday if you're interested. No drama, just food and conversation." 6 months ago, I had been the family scapegoat, blamed for problems I didn't create while secretly supporting people who publicly criticized me. Now I was a respected family member whose voice carried weight in important decisions. The financial damage was being repaired slowly but steadily. The emotional damage would take longer to heal, but the foundation of honesty we were building felt solid. I looked around the room where my parents had called me their most useless child and thought about everything that had changed since that moment. Sometimes the people who call you useless are afraid of your actual power. Sometimes the family members who criticize your choices the most are the ones who benefit from those choices the most. True family doesn't exploit your love and loyalty. True family supports your success rather than undermining it for their own benefit. Financial abuse is still abuse, regardless of blood relationships or family obligations. Most importantly, self-worth can't be determined by people who have a vested interest in diminishing you. My parents had spent years convincing me I was a disappointment while secretly depending on my success to solve their problems. Their criticism had never been about my actual failures. It had been about their need to maintain control over me. Standing up to family members who abuse your generosity isn't betrayal, it's self-preservation. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people who are harming themselves and others is to refuse to enable their destructive behavior. 6 months later, we were all better people than we had been at that Thanksgiving dinner. My parents were learning to take responsibility for their choices instead of blaming others. Madison was learning to live authentically instead of maintaining false appearances. David was learning to speak up for what's right instead of staying silent to avoid conflict. And I was learning that my voice mattered, that my boundaries were valid, and that demanding truth and accountability from family wasn't cruelty, it was love. The road to rebuilding our family relationships would be long, but for the first time in years, it was built on solid ground. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who were taking advantage of your kindness? How did you find the courage to set boundaries with people you love? Even when it was difficult, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about family dynamics, financial boundaries, and finding your voice in difficult situations. And please share this with anyone who might need to hear that it's okay to demand respect from the people who are supposed to love you most. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember that your worth isn't determined by the people who benefit from underestimating you. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is the truth, even when it's painful. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.